Mr. Trafford and his two sons went to the Smokies to have some fun time but never returned. But after 2 long years, two hikers discovered what really happened. Sit back and enjoy this story as it unfolds. Elliot Trafford was not born powerful. He grew up in a single-room home where hunger was familiar and hope was rationed. As a boy, he learned early that nothing would be handed to him. He sold scraps, worked nights, failed more times than he succeeded, and kept going. Years later, he built an empire from the ground up, not with inherited money or political favors, but with grit, patience, and an unshakable belief that success meant nothing if it didn't lift others with it. When Elliot became wealthy, the city expected him to disappear behind gates and guards. Instead, he showed up. He paid hospital bills anonymously. He rebuilt broken schools. He fixed roads no one in office cared to notice. He funded clean water projects in forgotten neighborhoods. To the people, he wasn't just rich. He was proof that someone had remembered them. The politicians noticed too. Quietly, bitterly, they watched as Elliot did what they had promised for years but never delivered. Where they offered speeches, he offered solutions. Where they offered excuses, he offered results. Suddenly, votes could no longer be bought with basic amenities. Trust had shifted, and it had shifted toward one man. That made him dangerous. Before we dive deeper into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from today, and if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and also share with your loved ones. After weeks of relentless meetings, sleepless nights, and mounting pressure from all sides, Elliot Trafford finally did something he rarely allowed himself to do: to open a school in the local community where local residents can enjoy free education. The school was almost ready. The final approvals were signed. The opening date had been announced. For the first time in months, there was nothing urgent left to fix. And so, on a quiet morning, Elliot made a decision that felt small but would later echo with terrible weight. He chose rest. He packed lightly and took his two sons north, toward the Smoky Mountains. The boys had grown used to their father being present in spirit but absent in body, calls instead of hugs, promises instead of time. The Smokies were different. There were no boardrooms there, no reporters, no politicians pretending to smile. Just tall trees, rocks, mountains, cool air, and silence that invited honesty. They laughed on the drive. Elliot listened as his sons talked over each other, arguing about music, pointing out clouds shaped like animals. For once, his phone stayed face down. He felt lighter, almost anonymous, like the man he had been before the city learned his name. By afternoon, they reached their lodge. Elliot sent a brief message to his assistant: "I will be back in 2 days." No details, no schedule. He believed foolishly that peace could be planned. As evening approached, the mountains swallowed the sun early. Shadows stretched across the road, and fog rolled in thick and quiet. A nearby shop owner later recalled seeing Elliot's car heading deeper into the winding pass, headlights cutting through the mist. That was the last confirmed sighting. When night fell, the lodge remained empty. No check-in, no calls. Elliot's phone rang once, then went straight to voicemail. His sons' devices were unreachable. Hours passed. That night, Elliot's wife did not sleep. She told herself it was nothing: poor reception in the mountains, a late dinner, boys exhausted from travel. Still, her hand kept drifting to her phone. One missed call, then another. She tried Elliot again, listening as the ringing faded into silence. Voicemail, always voicemail. 8 months pregnant, she paced the length of the living room, one hand on her swollen belly, the other clutching her phone like an anchor. With every passing minute, the house felt larger, emptier. She whispered prayers she hadn't said in years, bargaining with a God she suddenly needed very badly. Just let them be safe. I don't need explanations. Midnight passed. Then 2 a.m. the city outside slept peacefully, unaware that something precious was unraveling behind closed doors. She sat on the couch as dawn slowly crept through the curtains, painting the room in pale light that brought no comfort. By morning, hope had thinned into fear. She called the lodge. No check-in. She called nearby stations, hospitals, roadside services. No record. Her hands shook as she dressed, every movement heavy and deliberate. The baby shifted inside her, a reminder that she had to be strong, whether she felt it or not. At the police station, her voice cracked as she spoke Elliot's name. The officers recognized it instantly. Papers stopped moving. Conversations fell quiet. Within minutes, radios buzzed and notes were taken. This was no ordinary missing persons report. By noon, the story escaped the station walls. News alerts lit up phones across the city. Anchors spoke his name with disbelief. Headlines spread faster than facts. Beloved businessman missing. Philanthropist vanishes with his sons. Fears grow for city icon. Outside their home, cameras gathered. Inside, his wife sat alone, hands resting on her belly, staring at a future that had suddenly gone terrifyingly blank. The city had lost its most loved man. And she had lost the man who promised to come home. By the second day, the search became impossible to ignore. Police sealed off sections of the Smoky Mountains as word spread that Elliot Trafford and his two sons had vanished somewhere within its vast, unforgiving terrain. What began as a quiet inquiry turned into a full-scale operation. Patrol cars lined dirt roads. Search and rescue teams poured in from neighboring counties. Volunteers, teachers, mechanics, shop owners, came wearing Elliot's foundation t-shirts, desperate to return even a fraction of what he had given them. Helicopters thundered overhead, slicing through the fog as thermal cameras scanned endless stretches of forest. K-9 units combed trails and riverbanks, dogs pulling hard against their leashes, confused by scents that seemed to vanish into nothing. Divers entered icy streams where the water cut like glass, probing depths that swallowed sound and light. Hour after hour, day after day, the mountains gave nothing back. No skid marks, no broken branches, no footprints pressed into the mud. It was as if Elliot and the boys had stepped out of the world entirely. Even seasoned officers whispered that they had never seen a scene so clean, so empty. Hope began to thin, quietly at first, then all at once. Candles appeared outside Elliot's home. Strangers prayed together in silence. His wife watched the search updates on television, memorizing the faces of rescue workers, searching for reassurance in their eyes, and finding none. Meanwhile, city officials stepped before microphones. They offered sympathy. They praised Elliot's contributions. Their words were polished, careful, strangely distant. Promises of full cooperation were repeated without detail, without urgency. To many watching, it felt less like grief and more like obligation. The longer the search dragged on, the louder the unspoken question grew. How could three people vanish without leaving a single trace? As helicopters eventually grounded and volunteers drifted home, the mountain stood unchanged, calm, silent, indifferent. And with every empty hour, the city began to understand a devastating truth. This search was no longer about finding answers. It was about surviving the absence of them. When the search slowed, the noise grew louder. With no evidence and no answers, the city filled the silence the only way it could, with theories. Radios buzzed with speculation. Online forums dissected Elliot Trafford's last movements frame by frame. Some whispered kidnapping, convinced his wealth had finally made him a target. Others pointed fingers at political enemies, men who had smiled beside him in public while quietly losing influence because of him. A darker group spoke of business rivals, old deals, quiet vendettas waiting years to be paid. Every theory felt possible. Every theory felt terrifying. What hurt most was not the rumors, but what followed them. Police briefings grew shorter. Fewer vehicles were dispatched to the mountains. The helicopters that once shook the sky no longer flew overhead. Officially, the investigation was ongoing. In reality, it was thinning, quietly and carefully like hope had before it. Elliot's wife noticed everything. She noticed how calls were no longer returned the same day, how officers avoided her eyes, how the word resources kept appearing in conversations, as if her husband's life had become an equation that no longer balanced. Pregnant and exhausted, she sat alone in the house that had once felt safe, now echoing with absence. She replayed Elliot's last words to her over and over, how he promised the trip was short, how he joked about bringing the boys back spoiled with stories. She wondered what she had missed, what she should have said, what warning she had ignored. At night, the whispers crept closer. Strangers parked across the street, watching. Reporters knocked, hopping for tears. Anonymous messages arrived, some claiming knowledge, others offering cruel guesses. Each one chipped away at her resolve. The system she trusted had begun to move on. And as the city argued over who might be responsible, she faced a more painful truth. The man she loved was becoming a mystery instead of a priority. In the space between suspicion and silence, she felt it clearly for the first time. They were letting Elliot Trafford disappear. 1 year passed, but for Elliot Trafford's wife, time did not move forward, it circled. She was still pregnant when the search faded from headlines, when officials stopped calling, when the city slowly learned how to speak Elliot's name in the past tense without meaning to. Her body changed even as her world stood still. In the quiet hours of the night, she rested her hands on her stomach and wondered how to explain absence to a child not yet born. The baby came on a rainy morning. A boy with Elliot's eyes. She held him in the hospital room where congratulations mixed painfully with condolences. Nurses spoke in gentle tones. Flowers arrived with notes that said he would have been proud. She named her son carefully, as if names could carry memory, as if they could anchor what had been lost. Raising him was an act of survival. She learned how to smile for her child while grieving in pieces. She learned how to answer questions without answers. At night, she rocked the baby to sleep and told him stories about a father who built hope from nothing, about a man who believed the city could be kinder if someone dared to lead by example. On the Memorial Day, candles were lit in public squares, speeches were made. Choirs sang softly beneath open skies. His face stared out from framed photographs, forever unchanged. People bowed their heads, mourning a man they could not bury. There was no grave to visit, no finality, just ceremonies suspended in uncertainty. Her son grew older, the baby learned to walk, and still, somewhere in her heart, hope lived, quiet, stubborn, unreasonable. She listened for footsteps that never came. She left his side of the bed untouched. Grief without proof is a special kind of punishment. The city called it remembrance. The officials called it closure. But for the woman who waited every day, it was something else entirely. It was 2 years of loving a man who was neither alive nor dead, and refusing to let go. 2 years after Elliot Trafford vanished, the mountains finally spoke. It happened on a quiet afternoon when two hikers strayed off a marked trail, drawn by curiosity into a narrow crevice hidden behind thick brush and jagged stone. It was the kind of place sunlight barely reached, where sound died quickly and the air felt older than time. As they climbed lower, one of them noticed something unnatural wedged between the rocks, a torn travel bag, its fabric bleached and brittle. Then another. The bag was crushed, pinned as if deliberately placed there, not lost. Fear crept in slowly, the way it does when instinct recognizes danger before the mind accepts it. The hikers stepped back, calling authorities with shaking voices, eyes never leaving the shadows. When rescue teams arrived, the mountain seemed to hold its breath. Beneath a large slab of rock not far from the crevice, they found what the forest had been hiding. Skeletal remains lay scattered but unmistakable, time having stripped away everything but truth. Broken skulls rested among torn clothing, weathered shoes, fragments of a life once full. The silence around the site was absolute, heavy with meaning. There was no struggle preserved in the earth, only finality. As the remains were carefully examined, identifiers emerged: fabric patterns, a watch, items once photographed on a family trip. The names no one wanted to say out loud began to surface, slowly, painfully. By evening, word reached the city. The phones rang again just as they had 2 years earlier, but this time there was no hope attached. The wife collapsed into a chair as officers spoke gently, choosing words that could never soften the blow. The child was taken away before he could hear. The mountains had kept their secret long enough. Elliot Trafford and his sons had not disappeared. They had been taken and left where no one was meant to look. And with that discovery, grief returned to the city, not as uncertainty this time, but as a devastating, irreversible truth. The confirmation came quietly, wrapped in clinical language that could never match the weight of its meaning. Dental records, bone structure, personal effects recovered from the site. One by one, the answers aligned with devastating precision. The remains found beneath the mountain belonged to Elliot Trafford and his 2 sons. There was no longer room for doubt, no space left for hope to hide. The forensic report painted a picture as merciless as it was simple. A sudden rockfall, a massive shift in unstable terrain, the kind of natural collapse that gives no warning and offers no mercy. The fractures to the skulls were consistent with blunt force trauma from falling stone. No defensive wounds, no signs of restraint, no evidence of another human presence. No struggle. They hadn't run, they hadn't fought. There was no final chase, no villain stepping out from the shadows. Just a moment, ordinary, unlucky, irreversible, where the mountain decided their fate. The truth unsettled people more than any conspiracy ever had. For 2 years, the city had imagined enemies and motives, secrets and cover-ups. But now, it was forced to face something far more frightening: that a good man doing nothing wrong could simply be erased by chance. This time, the mourning was different. There were real funerals, 3 coffins, 3 names carved into stone, streets filled with people who stood silently, no cameras raised, no questions shouted. Politicians attended without speeches. There was nothing left to promise. Elliot's wife stood beside the graves, holding her youngest son, the child who would never know his father's voice. The city bowed its head, not just for the man it loved, but for the illusion it had lost, that goodness is always protected. Elliot Trafford did not fall to enemies or betrayal. He fell to fate. And somehow that truth hurt the most. Weeks later, the school opened. It stood where Elliot had planned it long before the mountains claimed him. Bright classrooms, wide windows, walls meant to hold futures instead of secrets. Above the entrance, a new name was unveiled: Elliot Trafford Memorial Academy. The letters were simple, permanent, impossible to ignore. The same politicians who once whispered against him sat in the front row, silent. There were no campaign smiles, no speeches about partnership. They clapped when the ribbon was cut, but their applause carried the weight of something unspoken. Elliot had done what they could not, and now, even in death, he had done it again. Children filled the halls. Laughter echoed where doubt once lived. For families who had never imagined education as a promise, the school became proof that one life could still change thousands. Elliot's wife watched from the back, her little son in her arms. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply stood, breathing in the sound of what Elliot had left behind. The city moved on as cities do. New leaders rose, old names faded. But Elliot Trafford's name did not. It lived in textbooks and classrooms, in scholarships and clean water taps, in roads that still carried people safely home. The men who once opposed him would one day be forgotten. Elliot would not. He never needed revenge to be remembered. His impact outlived them all. In the years that followed, his wife made a choice many did not expect. She did not seek to replace what was lost. She did not chase distraction or comfort disguised as healing. When asked, gently at first, then insistently, about remarriage, she always answered the same way. Her life had already been shaped by a love deep enough to last a lifetime. Instead, she chose purpose. She became a quiet presence at the academy that carried Elliot's name, watching children walk through doors her husband once dreamed about. She sat through board meetings not as a symbol but as a guardian. Grief did not harden her, it sharpened her resolve. Where bitterness could have taken root, she planted responsibility. The community noticed. Neighbors looked in on her without being asked. Teachers watched over her son as if he belonged to all of them. When he stumbled, someone was always there to steady him. When questions about his father came too early, too heavy, the answers were shared carefully, wrapped in respect. He grew up knowing his father not through absence, but through echoes, stories told at dinner tables, names spoken with gratitude, classrooms filled because one man once refused to forget the poor. Time passed, buildings aged, new projects replaced old ones, but Eliot's influence didn't fade, it multiplied, carried forward by people who learned generosity by watching it lived. On the anniversary of his death, there were no grand ceremonies anymore, just small gatherings, candles, quiet conversations, proof that remembrance didn't need an audience. Standing beside her son, Elliot's wife finally understood something grief had hidden for years. Her husband had not been taken from the world. He had been given to it. And long after stone and steel would crumble, one truth remained, spoken softly but with certainty. Elliot Trafford didn't just build buildings, he built people, and people remember.